guys are lovely. I had such a fun morning. Thank you for having me. I'm Rodney Evans of The Ready. Brave New Work is a book that our founder, Aaron Dignan, wrote it came out this year. It's great, get it. That's why that's the name of this talk, because we'll be talking about the concepts contained inside this book. And we will begin with a pop quiz. Oh, I know the pain. Okay, so tell me, from what year do you think this organizational chart might have come? 2019. Other guesses? Anybody over here? The 90s? 93? Anybody else? 1910. Boom. I have no prizes. Sorry, there will be no prizes today. Yeah. So this org chart was created in 1910. It's one of the earliest org charts that we've been able to find in our research. And the reason that I show it when I do this talk all over the world is because if I showed you anything else that was 100 years old, whether that was a shoe or a house or a piece of clothing, you would go, that's a century old. But the tool through which we organize all of human effort in most systems in the world could be carbon dated at yesterday or 110 years ago. We're not sure. Does that seem weird to anybody else? To us, that means one of two things. Either it's working perfectly, so there hasn't been a need to evolve, which by your laughter, I think we agree that's not what's happening, or we're stuck in some way. We just haven't figured out another way of thinking about our system. All right, second pop quiz. These are some ways of working. We're going to talk a lot about the how of work today. And these are some ways of working that we've pulled together. So I'm going to read them, summarize them to you, and I'd like you to think about where I might have pulled them from. So the first one is insist on doing everything through channels. When possible, refer matters to committee. Haggle over the precise wordings of communications. Don't let that go out without a lot of people seeing it and wordsmithing it. Refer back to matters decided on at the last meeting. This is one of my personal favorites. Let's agree in the room, and then let's all go out in the hallway and relitigate and talk smack about the decision we made, and then come back together and go like, do we really feel good about this, or should we start over? And finally, multiply the procedures and clearances involved. As Kai mentioned in my biography, I worked for a German investment bank for 7 years, so that feels deeply familiar to me. So just guesses, where might I have pulled these ways of working from? Any thoughts?
My company.
Your company, sure. Anybody else? US government, very close. Dilbert, US Army. This was actually from the CIA's Guide to Simple Sabotage. So it's wild. So in World War II, the CIA undertook an extensive research company to figure out how to deprive German businesses of revenue. And these were 5 of 14 tactics provided to our allies who were infiltrating those systems to ruin them. So for all of us who do feel like those things feel very familiar to us, the question becomes, when did our work become synonymous with sabotage? When does the stuff that we do all day equate to the things that we know actually ruin companies and deprive us of money? So to explore that question, we're going to do a teeny tiny history lesson, and we're going to start with thinking about how we got here. There was a time when our economy was based on the artisan culture, right? So if you were a person who made shoes, you did all the things. You were user design, you were testing, you were supply chain, you were customer service, you did everything. That could be really great in terms of individuals having a varied skill set. Wasn't so great for consistency, wasn't so great for scaling, was not so great for affordability. So what happens? This guy comes along. Anybody recognize this friendly face? Who? Somebody over there said his name. Taylor. Yes, exactly. So Frederick Winslow Taylor comes on the scene. He is the inventor of a discipline called management science. Many of you are probably familiar with it. It is what the Harvard Business School was founded upon. And what he says is, rather than having this shoemaker both put on the soles and do the customer service and have a size 9 be a size 12 in another town, let's start to separate the thinking from the doing. This is how we're going to scale, get consistency, make 40,000 pairs of boots that we need for an army that's going to war. And so he births a lot of innovation. And this works exceedingly well. We have these super happy and enlightened people who are feeling a lot of meaning in their work, as you can tell by their expressions. So the doers, who are actually closest to the context, are doing one piece of the work. This is reductionist approach to working. And what are the managers doing? The thinkers. They're off on the side with a stopwatch, going, is there a way to put the sole on faster, thread the laces quicker, cut out 3 pennies here and 4 pennies there? And management science has had a real good run, right? We had 100 years of more efficiency, more consistency, more consumerism, more affordability, et cetera, et cetera. So what's the problem? The problem is it's not working so well anymore. And we look at statistics like these that I've thrown up here, and on the one hand, if you had a company that was traded on the S&P in the 1960s, the average lifespan of that company was about 60 years. Those same companies today, the average lifespan is about 10 years. And a company leaves the S&P every 2.5 weeks. And on the other side, looking at ROA, because we know things like stock prices can be a bit manipulated, when we look at ROA, same time span, the money you could make on what you had, on your products, on your services, on your infrastructure, in the 60s was about 5%. Now it's down to just over 1% and declining all the time. We've done the work we can do to get more with less in most places. There's not a lot more slack in a lot of systems for us to be harvesting. And that doesn't even mention the human impact. I mean, most of you, given what you do for a living, know these statistics deeply. 50% of the workforce in the US is unengaged. 16% is actively disengaged. Those are your saboteurs, folks. Those are the ones who come to work and relitigating those decisions and making meetings go on forever. People are not happy in their jobs, and our companies are not thriving in this knowledge economy that we're working in. So what's going on? What's happened to us? Unfortunately, what's happened to us is that bureaucracy has taken hold in a lot of our systems. Those are political systems, those are economic systems, those are certainly corporate systems, and where bureaucracy once was a way to regulate and control and create efficiency, now a lot of us in big companies feel like we're walking through mud, like we just can't get anything done. And the irony of it is, in a lot of places, we're more educated and more highly compensated than we have been in human history, but we're not doing the best work of our lives because we're stuck in systems that prevent that. Bureaucracy is a complicated answer to what is a complex problem. Does that make sense to you all? We're going to do a little quiz about complicated and complex. So we have a problem set here. On one side, we have a watch, and on the other side, we have an engine. Show of hands, do you guys think that this is a complicated slide or a complex slide? Complicated, watch and an engine, complicated, complex, split down the room, which has never happened to me before. That's super weird. So these devices are, in fact, complicated. Anybody know what complicated means? Come on, you guys all raised your hand. An expert could figure it out. Great, what else? Lots of parts, could put it back together. There are a finite number of interactions in a complicated system. What about these two? We have weather and traffic. Complicated? Complex. Yeah, what makes them complex? What makes traffic complex? We don't know the cause. Great, what else? Can't control it. Can we predict it? To an extent, complex systems are dispositional. So we know roughly when it might rain. We know roughly when there might be traffic, but we can't predict and we can't control. That's what bureaucracy was made for. Bureaucracy was made for a predict and control environment, and if we understand that that's not the environment that we're in, then intuitively we know bureaucracy is not going to solve the problems that we have. So what should we do about it? Just burn it all down? Just let chaos reign? We think about surviving complexity as requiring a different kind of operating system. So let's just talk for a second, because I know all of you know what an operating system is, but let's talk about an operating system at an organizational level. So we think about an OS as being the beliefs, the rules, the assumptions, the practices, the principles that you hold in your organization. So give me a couple of examples. Tell me something about your company's operating system.
Meetings.
You have meetings. What are they for?
Not sure.
Great. That's a thing that exists in your operating system. What else?
Playbooks.
What?
Playbooks.
Levels?
Yeah, so playbooks.
Oh, playbooks. Yeah, cool. Great. What else?
Email.
Also labels. Email. So right, these are the things. Like, you go into a place, we're in this beautiful building today, you can tell a lot about an operating system by looking around it. What are the things that we believe in? What are the assumptions that we hold? How do we dress? How do we behave? Where do we put the chairs? How do you get promoted? Who gets paid? Who makes decisions? How do we make those decisions? These are the practices and principles that live inside our operating system. And in order to survive in complexity, we need an operating system that doesn't look like bureaucracy. And if you don't remember anything else from talking with me today, this is just an easy shortcut that I use a lot in a lot of places that seems to land with people. So on one side, we have the traditional stoplight, and on the other side, we have a roundabout. So show of hands, which do you think is safer? Traditional stoplight? Roundabout? Yeah, it's way safer. It's about 80% safer overall and about 75% safer on collision. Which do you think has higher throughput, gets more cars to where they're going? Stoplight? Roundabout. By about 75% higher throughput. Which do you think is cheaper to maintain? Stoplight? Roundabout? Yeah, by about $10,000 over the course of its life. Which one do we have almost none of in this country? Stoplights? No, roundabouts. And like, I know, before you say you can't put a roundabout in Times Square because it'll be mayhem, I know, I got it. It is somewhat context dependent, but think about how often you can find a solution that is actually better, cheaper, and faster, and then just ignore it for 100 years. That's insane. So why don't we change? Why are we all stoplights all the time? Let's talk about it. What do you guys think? Fear of what? Fear of the unknown outcome? What do you think is happening in that roundabout? Like, are there gorillas in there? Pretty scary roundabouts. Yeah, there is definitely a fear thing. We'll come back to that. Yeah, you go ahead.
Inertia. We already have a stoplight.
Sure. Why change? Absolutely. And in the work all of us do, how common is that? We know you have to go a little bit slower to go faster. We know that there's some undoing often in order to do something new. And it's really easy to just go like, you know, we got a lot of org debt around this design. Can we just live with it or optimize it? Or in this case, just add a stop sign to it because it's not working, which is my favorite part of this photo. Yeah, what else? There was someone over here. Go ahead.
Command and control.
Command and control, absolutely. Who's in charge here? The machine. Yeah, the man. Yeah, the government's in charge. Who's in charge here? The drivers are. Because we trust that in a roundabout, everybody is in the same context. We're looking at the same problem set. We have some common purpose, which is we'd all like to get out of here eventually, and preferably we'd get out of here alive. And so we believe basically that humans should be competent to make those decisions, instead of over here where we say, we'll tell you when to go, we'll tell you when to stop, and when you're stopped, feel free to just sit there and completely space out and look at your phone. This is a perfect analogy for what happens at work, because the feeling of being in a roundabout is a bit scary. You are responsible for something. You are responsible for your risk. You're not sitting at the stoplight waiting for somebody to tell you when it's time to make a decision, when it's time to make a move. But isn't that how we want to feel at work? Like, don't we want to feel a little bit alive? I do, for sure. So to my friend over here, you could just come up here and do this if you want. So yeah, on this side, we have control and compliance. Which I like the compliance part, because how many of you have ever been at a stoplight in the middle of the night where there's not a car for 50 miles and you just sit there? which is basically what bureaucracy is. And on this side, we have trust and autonomy, which is basically we think if we give people simple rules, they will follow them and they'll do a reasonably good job. That's the kind of operating system we want to design. We want to design a roundabout operating system. So how do we do it? This is the OS canvas. You can find this online. You can download it in a pretty format if that's useful to you. And what we think about in our OS canvas is two things. One is, what are the principles in each of these fields that we're after? And the other is, what are the practices that we're actually doing? And where we see tension, and where we see challenge, and where we see mess is where those things diverge. So I'll give you a couple of examples. I hear in authority a lot, we want our employees to be empowered. Like, how many times a day do we hear that? I want my employees to feel empowered. I want them to act like owners. I want them to take smart risks. I want them to fail fast. All the buzzwords, I get it. That's a thing that we believe in. And then I say, cool, me too. What are your practices around autonomy? And you know what people say? We don't have any. Or, I'm the leader, so I make the decisions. Or, I'd rather people ask for forgiveness than permission, which is my least favorite of all of those. We don't have a practice that says, here's your domain, here's your guardrails, here's your waterline, here's your decision rights, whatever, between which you can and should and must run. We say, we want empowerment, but we're not going to actually give you any power. That's problematic. Same thing with meetings. Whoever my friend over there is who says, we have meetings all day, we don't really know why. I mean, don't we all, right? So I hear from people all the time, we invest all this time and money, we have no time to do our work, we're sitting in meetings, blah, 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 blah. Cool, what's the principle you're after? We want meetings to be a great use of time where everybody gets what they need and they're really efficient and we don't stay in them longer than we have to. Awesome. Tell me about your meetings. Well, a leader makes an agenda and then they walk through it and then in the last 3 minutes there's time for questions. Okay, that practice is not getting you that principle. And that's where we get tension. That's where we get tension in our operating system. And I'm using that word because we're going to talk about what to do about it in a second. I'm going to give you a couple of really quick case studies that are related to interesting organizations doing interesting things related to their OS. So the first one is Handelsbanken. There are lots of fields in the OS that Handelsbanken has experimented with and had a lot of success doing. The one that I like to point to is about authority. So Handelsbanken has historically given an outsized amount of authority to its retail branches. Within certain guardrails, it has allowed branches to set rates, to do different things for customer service that for a bank is very atypical. Because where is the power usually held in a retail bank? In the middle. So they've actually pushed a lot of that authority to the edges. And we could talk about their compensation system another time, which is also very interesting. But what they've also done is basically said, rather than having the branches compete with one another, we're going to be rewarded on the whole winning. And so what does that do? If I'm running the branch in Norway and you're running the branch in Finland and you're crushing it and I'm struggling, rather than trying to eat your lunch, I'm probably just going to call you and ask what you're doing. Because if we win, we all win. And if you win and I lose, we all lose. It just changes the whole dynamic of competition versus collaboration. Hire is a really fascinating company. Are a lot of you familiar with Hire? This is one that we're watching very closely right now. They consider themselves to be in their 5th major organizational transformation, and they have recently gone to what is effectively a lot, like 1,000 very small businesses. They've gone to a micro enterprise model and a fully marketplace model inside a 60,000 person company. So at Hire, if I have an idea for a product and I can get a couple of you excited about doing it, I can compete for funding and start my business inside the organization. Their results have been absolutely bonkers over the last couple of years, including some very significant acquisitions here and other places that are really worth reading about. The last one I'll talk about is Morningstar. I feel like I might be preaching to the crowd with this one, but Morningstar is a company we look at a lot in terms of compensation. So principle of transparency and fairness around compensation and the actual practice. Anybody know what Morningstar does? What?
Vegan food. Veggie burgers.
Self-set pay. Close. These are the tomato processors, not the veggie burgers, which is why all the tomatoes. So they have a practice of transparency, of fairness, of trusting the stoplight. And so what they do is let every employee, from the tomato picker to the CEO, write a letter of intent each year saying what they intend to do that year and how much they think they should be paid for it. And then they set their own pay. And if someone sees that information and doesn't like it, they can start a conflict resolution process. That almost never happens. And working with a lot of Fortune 500 companies, I give that example, and 10 times out of 10 they say, it would never work here. And my question is, like, if tomato pickers can do this effectively and have been for decades, why can't all the MBAs in the house? Incidentally, we're doing this at my own company, and it is not without pain, but it's also a lot better than the alternative. I'd be happy to talk to you guys later about that if you're curious. So what these companies have in common, and the shorthand in terms of the kind of roundabout OS that we're after, is they're people positive. They basically think human beings want to do a good job, want to have meaning in their work, want to contribute something, and aren't just like lazy lumps that must be managed every second to get anything out of them. And they're complexity conscious. They understand that bureaucracy is not the answer to a system that you cannot predict and control. And so they're making choices in their operating system that reflect both of those things. So cool. Let's do it, right? Like, let's all change. That sounds super. Why not? Let's roll. The challenge is the way that we change and the way that we've historically changed looks a lot more like the stoplight than it looks like the roundabout. Change management as a discipline looks like this, right? Like, we've got the pit of despair, and people fall into it, and then some people get over a bridge, I don't know, to the other side. And then I just really looked at this slide on the plane on the way here for the first time, even though I've had it up here dozens of times. I would like to meet the person who, at the end of a successful transformation, holds up a flag that says ROI. I'm just like, is that the expression of human emotion that most of us feel at the end of change? No, probably not. Anyway, you know, this is what fancy consultants will show you, that change can be done in a linear, phased way, and we'll all change at the same time, and people will feel the valley of despair, but they'll just climb over it with the right tools and the right communications. And it's just nonsense. It just doesn't work. And it's why change management fails. And I'm just as guilty of it as anyone else, because I did it for a company for years. And it intuitively makes sense, and it is a stoplight solution. It's tidy. Put change on a Gantt chart. Reword that email to the company saying what we're going to do in the future. That feels great. It just doesn't work, which is tough for us. We have to change in a different way. We can't just say we want our operating system to look like a roundabout, and we want our principles to be more in line with the future of work and with emergent org design, but we want to get there through this traditional bureaucratic top-down command and control process. And that's really sticky for people to actually get. But the good news about that is it also means that if you don't buy into that nonsense, that anybody inside a system can find enough agency to do something, which is also pretty cool. I like to show this slide when I start at client engagements and watch people's faces go like, uh-oh, what did I hire? Because that's what they think they want. It doesn't matter what you tell them in the sales process. They believe that I'm going to come in and I'm going to draw them a plan. Maybe I'm going to draw them a new org chart, maybe, if they're lucky. And then they're going to like pick a bunch of people who they think are the more woke or more progressive or more excited, and they're going to put them together in a tiger team, and then those people are going to do it to everybody else. Yeah, that's not what's going to happen. What we're trying to do when we're transforming in a different way is to co-create a future state and to change the ways that we work inside of our work. So I don't want to just go to your terrible meeting and dial in that meeting. I want to understand what is the work that we're trying to do, what is the meeting that will serve it, and I want to facilitate your team in learning how to meet in a different way while actually realizing the purpose of that meeting. It's a real shift, and it's harder. It's harder and it's messier because you're trying to hold the content and the context in your minds at the same time. You're trying to hold the how and the what. And until the how becomes second nature, that creates a lot of cognitive load for people. But what we're trying to get large, complex systems to do is, rather than go into a dark room and make a very detailed plan, to just figure out what they could try and where they could start and what a transformation loop looks like. And when I say every single person can and might and should have some agency in this, I really mean it. When I get a team together at any level of an organization, what I'm trying to understand is, what are the tensions in your OS? What is keeping your team from doing the best work of its life? Okay, cool. What can we try? What are a bunch of practices that we could try? And when this happens, and when you do it with teams that are new to it, they'll have very lofty tensions and very lofty practices, and your work is to get them to a place where they actually have agency and autonomy to try something. And you can learn a lot about the system you're operating in based on the experiments that they are comfortable designing. So I've gone into a system where the first experiment was like, healthy snacks in the vending machine. And I was like, okay, if we're shooting for the stars, let's do it. And then I've had other teams that immediately said, you know, we think we should sell this part of the business as an experiment. It's like, oh, okay, well, that's at a different altitude. The question is just, how can we notice our tensions, find practices, and then design an experiment really around the work? And when I say that, I mean, it's not a tiger team. It's not your team saying to another team, we're doing this experiment and we'll tell you when we've decided. It's, how do we get all of the people who are impacted by the work, making the decisions, into an operating rhythm, into a room to sprint together? And in large organizations, which from talking to you all today, many of you work in, often the move of just getting a cross-functional group together that has displayed typically siloed behavior, like that will often get a lot of juice for the squeeze. But just getting to this experimental mindset of, we're not going to do a big top-down transformation, we're just going to start from where we are and figure out what we can try, makes a really big difference. And so I like to show this slide as we close, because as many of you may know, for decades and decades and decades in the Olympics, this is how you went over a high jump. Did you guys know that? Doesn't he look so stupid? It's amazing. It's amazing. But this was the technique that was preferred by the best athletes in the world until Dick Fosbury, who was the first guy to go over backwards. And everybody thought he was nuts. And that's how we feel about doing transformation work in this way. Is it looks weird, and people question it, and it's anti 100+ years of history, and it's messy, and it's hard, and it can be slow, and it works. So be like Dick Fosbury. Don't keep trying to make the straddle technique better and get an inch higher. Do the thing that feels counterintuitive, but that you intuitively know could work. See what you can try. Find the agency that you have in whatever patch of the place is yours and run an experiment. That's how change happens. And those little things, those little loops, get bigger and bigger and bigger, and they add up and add up and add up until you have a system that looks like a roundabout. Thanks. All right, y'all, we do have time for questions. I'm going to give you this, and then I'm going to yell.
I'll give that. I'll give that. So is it practice, experiment, tension, or is it tension, practice, experiment?
Great question. We start with the tension. Start with the tension. It's like starting with the problem, but we don't think about tensions as problems. We just think about them as data. So yeah, and a pro tip as you're considering practices, because when we discover what a tension is with our team in an operating system, like we don't like how we make decisions, or we don't like how we meet, or we don't like how we hire, or we don't like how we, or whatever the thing is, our natural inclination as a group is to get to the best answer the quickest. That's what MBAs have taught us. So what we want to do instead is we want to generate multiple practices and then decide what we're going to try. That's why we add it in the loop and we don't go right from tension to experiment, is because we want a generative piece in there where we think about a bunch of different things that could be possible. We're going to practice this for any of you who come to the session right after this. Yeah, right here.
How do you discover tension?
How did we discover tension?
Yeah. And agree in the team.
And agree? Okay, how do you discover and agree on tension in the team? I have lots of ideas about this. So the easiest thing that you're probably doing already is retrospection. So in a retro, there are a lot of ways to think about retros, right? Right? Yeah, you guys do this. One of the things that I've been doing lately that's been working really well is to separate out retrospecting the what from retrospecting the how. And so whether it's with different colored sticky notes or different containers in my facilitation, I've been like, okay, let's talk about how the work went. Then let's talk about how we work together and keep those conversations a little bit clean. You might notice tensions in both. You might notice tensions in both the what and the how. But I've just noticed that that is an easy way. So retrospection is one really good way. Honestly, when you start to be clear on your decision rights inside of a system, you'll just notice. You'll just start to notice tension. And the weirdest thing about it, and this is my personal experience, when I started working with Aaron at the Ready, I can't remember anymore what the thing was, but I remember calling him and I was very upset. And I was like, I don't like this and I think it should be this way. And he was like, yeah, go do it. Who said no? Who's stopping you? Whose approval do you need? So if you're clear on what you can do or what you can spend or where there is a water line, then you can start noticing tension yourself just by asking yourself, why is this so frustrating? Why is this taking so long? I have an idea for a better way to do this. Why is this slowing me down? Yeah, yeah.
Are you making an assumption there that if you think about the new organization in the future, that they have the capability, the current teams have the capabilities to be value add in the new thing?
Am I making the assumption that in the new org, all teams will be valuable?
No, I mean, will the current capabilities of the current team create value in the future? Because much of the change I see, especially in digital,
yeah,
is there's only 20% of the organization is going to make it.
Okay, yeah. So hard to say. Here's why I say it's hard to say. Because in most organizations that are not doing as well as they might be able to, most people are very happy to lay the blame at the people and their capabilities, which may turn out to be true. But if your operating system is completely screwed up, then it's not yet time to lay the blame at the feet of the people. So I take the perspective of, let's start to figure out how to experiment with your operating system to make it more adaptive, more meaningful, et cetera, and then see what happens with the people. Because it's amazing to see that folks will make a leap. You know, fish will make the leap when the aquarium changes. That happens. And in an operating system like the one that I'm talking about, we get super, super clear on what our purpose and what our strategies are, and we have more agency in terms of how we welcome and sit and part with our team members. And so what I see a lot is as organizations go through change and they do become more adaptive in nature, people self-select out in a way that a traditional change management would be like, let's just fire all these people and then we'll take the survivors with us to the promised land. You know, like in this kind of transformation, I do often see people go like, you know what, I can see what's happening here and I don't have the skill set to do this and I'm gonna go somewhere where I do. So I would just ask this group who's in those kinds of conversations to suspend some judgment about who might make it until you give them some tools and see what they do with them. Because I've been surprised on a number of occasions. Yeah, right here.
Did you ever consult on a project that wasn't started from the top, like bottom up?
Yeah, I have. So here's the thing. If you're not gonna have the buy-in and the partnership of the leadership team, at least you need to have a partner in the system who has a place to party. Like, you can't start with someone who has no team, no domain, no budget, no authority themselves, because the role of the leader in this kind of thing is to create a space where we can try stuff. And if your partner doesn't have the ability to create that space, you're going to be swimming upstream. So it does not have to be top down. I've worked with plenty of companies where I was not working with the CEO, but in those cases, I at least wanted to be working with someone who's a P&L owner or a product owner or a department head or something like that, just to get enough air cover to try some stuff. Yeah. Yeah, sure, go ahead.
Talk a little bit more about
Do you have any suggestion for working with a globally integrated enterprise, one that has confounding variables where it's multicultural, really complex, nuanced, tons of centers all over the world, thousands upon thousands, hundreds of thousands of employees? Is there any advice you would give to someone kind of scared
Yeah.
with that type of challenge?
Scared and in the midst of it? Start small and start safe. Just find a place that you can work. And I don't want to say ignore the complexity, but small moves over big moves. In an environment like that, I was having a conversation with someone this morning about an environment that is similar to the one that you're describing. And in an environment like that, I've had the experience of becoming very easily overwhelmed, even as an external person, because I'm like, oh my God, this is like a country. We're never going to be able to make change here. But find a place to play. Find a team, find a problem, find a domain where you can start to actually work differently. And the other thing is, go where there's energy. I feel like in transformation, we want to go where things are burning. We want to go to the burning platform because it's causing us more pain. But sometimes what we actually need to do is find the people who understand this is going to be messy and it's going to be uncomfortable and it's going to require vulnerability and new ways of working and all of this other stuff, and just start with them because they're the ones who are willing to try something. Yeah, sorry.
What are some of the tools that you are providing for that tactical layer, like the product teams, as part of this transformation?
Tools that we're providing.
Yeah.
So there are a bunch of things. One is certainly different kinds of meeting structures. Look, inside that OS canvas, there are practices that we would recommend trying in every single one of them. And I don't think that those practices are terribly different whether you're talking about a product team or a leadership team, honestly. Because they're ways of working, they're not particularly content oriented, but a couple of really, a couple that I've seen that are very related to product is real clarity around decision making. So what I often see in product organizations is it the business? Is it the engineers? Is it the product? Who gets to decide? Who has control of the roadmap? Who has the last word? Blah, blah, blah. And the reality is it doesn't necessarily matter which one of those people or which one of those functions has the decision. It's just really great if someone does. And if we understand who's giving advice and who's actually owning the decision, that makes a really big difference. So decision rights are one that I would highly recommend. And then, you know, things that you all probably do very naturally, but a lot of more traditional orgs don't, like how are we visualizing our work? Are we working on asynchronous platforms? Are we out of email? Like those kinds of things are easy wins. Any more? Is that it? Oh, can we do one more? One last question.
Oh, sorry.
Sorry.
I noticed, or I think I noticed, you didn't use the word culture
I
once. And so I was curious if that was deliberate, and if so, how is culture different from your operating system?
What a great question to end with. It is deliberate. So I believe, personally, that culture is the result of the choices you make inside your operating system. It is the result of the principles and practices and their dissonance or congruence. It is not a thing that is separate that you can work on. So you can change the way that you create strategy or the way that you do innovation or the way that you pay people or the way that you hire or the way that you make decisions, and what results from that in a complex system will be your culture. What you can't do is say, I'm gonna go work on my culture, because that ends up looking like posters in the cafeteria and values on mugs, and honestly, like, let's just stop. Like, it's nonsense. So I worked with a guy for a while who said to me, which I've often thought about, culture is nothing more or less than the sum of all of the decisions and all of the conversations inside any system. And I fundamentally think that that's true. So I don't talk ever about working on culture. And when I'm working with companies, one of the things I really want them to do is look at how they're working in the work, because otherwise they have a tendency and a desire to do culture work over here on the side of their desk, and like to make it a fun side hustle rather than saying we'll get a different culture by doing things differently and working in different ways. Okay, I think that's it. Thank you guys.